There was a moment when Mary decided, silently and almost imperceptibly, even to herself, that she would no longer text first. Not because that was her genuine desire, but because, at some point, she came to believe that distancing herself might finally awaken something in him that her presence had not yet managed to provoke. This decision didn't stem from coldness, but from a subtle fear that grew gradually. The fear of showing too much interest, of becoming more involved than he was, of becoming predictable and, as a result, being easily replaced or forgotten. So, every time she felt the urge to talk to him, to share something simple from her day, or to maintain that light connection that used to happen naturally, she held back, as if every spontaneous gesture now needed to be filtered by a logic that didn't come from what she felt, but from what she thought she should do, in order not to lose control of the situation. Initially, this restraint brought a sense of control that felt almost comforting, as if she were finally protecting herself from giving in too quickly, and at the same time, creating the necessary space for him to notice her absence. She began to view her own silence as a strategy, as if she were participating in an invisible game in which the less she appeared, the more he would miss her and, inevitably, return more involved. But as the days went by, something began to change inside her in a way that was hard to ignore, because while she expected signs of closeness, more frequent messages, or any demonstration that her absence was being felt, all she found was a constant and disconcerting silence. It wasn't a silence heavy with tension, nor a silence that suggested something was about to happen, but a simple silence, almost too comfortable, as if her absence hadn't caused any real disruption to his emotional routine. And it was at this point that the doubt began to surface more deeply. Not as a direct question, but as an uncomfortable feeling that lingered because, deep down, Mary began to realize that perhaps she wasn't provoking any longing at all, but merely revealing something that already existed. She wasn't creating a sense of loss. She wasn't awakening desire. She wasn't activating anything that was dormant. She was simply revealing that her presence hadn't yet become significant enough to be felt in her absence. And this is the part that almost no one has the courage to say, because it's much more comfortable to believe that simply distancing oneself is enough to be valued than to face the possibility that the impact hasn't yet been built. A man doesn't miss you because you disappear, and if at any point you found yourself trying to hold back, distance yourself, or seem less involved just to see if he reacted, then take the opportunity to like this video and follow the channel, because that shows me that this type of content makes sense to you and also helps to spread this message to more women who need to hear it. And if you've ever experienced something like this, tell me in the comments, because your story might be exactly what another woman needs to read to finally understand what's happening to her. What makes everything even more confusing for Mary is that, on some level, this behavior of withdrawing actually seems to work. And that's exactly what has sustained this idea for so long without being questioned. There are times when she withdraws, takes a while to respond, or simply disappears for a while, and he reappears with more attention, more presence, and even a different energy, which makes it seem like she has finally found the right way to provoke what she wanted. But what almost no one explains is that this type of reaction doesn't stem from the value that has been built up, but from a momentary stimulus that activates curiosity, ego, or even a slight discomfort at no longer having the access that previously seemed guaranteed. And that's exactly why it's so confusing, because when a man already has some level of interest, this slight distancing can generate an immediate response, but it doesn't mean he's started to feel something deeper, only that something has been interrupted. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything, because an interested man reacts to the absence by trying to get closer, while an indifferent man simply adapts to it and continues his own routine without truly missing the situation. And when you can't distinguish between those two things, you start interpreting any small rep as proof that the strategy is working, when in fact it may only be delaying a distancing that would have happened anyway. Furthermore, when you start alternating between presence and absence in a calculated way, what you create is not mystery, but inconsistency and inconsistency. Contrary to what many believe, does not awaken true desire. It generates emotional doubt. He begins to realize that something is unclear, that his energy is unstable, that what you demonstrate today does not correspond to what you demonstrated before, and this does not bring him closer safely, but makes him retreat to protect himself, because just as you try not to get too involved so you don't get hurt, he also tries to understand if it's worth investing in something that doesn't seem solid enough to sustain itself. And at that point, without realizing it, you create a dynamic where both are trying to protect themselves at the same time, each waiting for confirmation that never comes clearly. The problem is that absence by itself doesn't have the power to create value where it doesn't yet exist. Because longing isn't born from emptiness, it's born from the emotional experience that was built before it. If there was no real connection, no genuine presence, and no consistent emotional impact, the separation doesn't intensify anything. It only makes more evident what never truly solidified. And that's why so many women come out of this situation feeling like they did everything right, and yet were forgotten, when in reality, they were trying to create an effect without first building the foundation that supports it. Distance without connection doesn't create longing, it creates forgetfulness. What Mary still couldn't clearly see was that, while she believed she was controlling how he perceived her, he was also interpreting each of her behavioral changes based on his own frame of reference and insecurities. When she started responding less, showing less interest, and becoming more distant, he didn't interpret that as value, but as a possible loss of interest, as if something had changed inside her without him understanding exactly why. Faced with this uncertainty, his reaction was not to get closer more intensely, but rather to subtly withdraw, like someone who no longer wants to invest in something that no longer seems as secure as before. Because just as she was trying not to expose herself too much so as not to get hurt, he also began to protect himself, reducing his own involvement to avoid the feeling of giving more than he was receiving. This is the point that many women don't realize, because they believe that men will always react to distance with more interest, when in reality, they also interpret signals and adjust their own behavior according to what they feel is happening, and when what he feels is doubt, inconsistency, and a lack of emotional clarity. The natural instinct is not to delve deeper, but to preserve his own stability by avoiding further involvement. Without realizing it, the two begin to enter a silent dynamic in which neither of them takes a clear stance, neither of them confidently demonstrates what they feel, and both end up waiting for an action that never happens. Mary, for her part, begins to feel that she is being ignored, that she is losing ground, that she is becoming less important, while he, for his part, begins to feel that he shouldn't insist, that perhaps she isn't as involved as she seemed at first, and this disconnect grows without any explicit conflict, without direct conversation, without a clear breaking point, which makes everything even more confusing and emotionally draining, because there isn't a specific moment when everything breaks down, but rather a sequence of small separations that weaken the bond until it simply ceases to exist as before. And the most painful part of this process is not just the distance that is created, but the feeling of becoming invisible within something that, at some point, seemed promising. Mary begins to question her own worth. She starts to wonder where she went wrong. She begins to believe that perhaps she wasn't enough, when, in fact, what happened was a construction that never became solid enough to be sustained. Because in the end, however hard it is to admit, nobody misses what never became meaningful. There came a moment when Mary, tired of trying to understand what was happening, realized that she was directing all her energy towards provoking in him a feeling that, in truth, she wasn't even sure existed. Until then, every decision she made, every silence she maintained, and every impulse she suppressed was linked to a single intention: to make him miss her, as if that were the ultimate proof that there was something between them. But amidst this constant effort, a question arose that she had never allowed herself to honestly ask, a question simple in form, but deeply uncomfortable in its answer. Why am I trying to make him feel something? instead of noticing if he actually feels it. And it was at that moment that something began to reorganize itself within her. Because for the first time, she stopped looking at the situation as a game that needed to be won and began to see it as a reality that needed to be understood. She began to realize that she wasn't just distancing herself. She was disconnecting from herself, ignoring what she truly felt in order to maintain a behavior that didn't represent who she was, but who she thought she needed to be in order not to lose control. And upon recognizing this, she stopped focusing on controlling his reactions and began to observe his actions more clearly. No longer filtering everything through the expectation that he should react, but looking at what he actually did when there was no effort on her part. This change was neither immediate nor comfortable because it required facing truths that had previously been avoided, but it brought something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of emotional clarity that no longer depended on his response. She began to understand that presence isn't about always being available, but about being genuine when you are, about not fragmenting your own behavior for fear of seeming too much or losing someone who hasn't yet shown a willingness to stay. And gradually, she abandoned the idea that she needed to provoke, manipulate, or adjust her behavior to awaken something, because she realized that this didn't create connection, it only masked her absence. Instead, she began to exist more fully, allowing her actions to reflect what she felt, without excesses, but also without strategic blocks that distanced her from her own authenticity. And it was at that point that the dynamic began to change. Not necessarily within him, but within her, because when you stop trying to control what the other person feels, you can finally see clearly what is really happening. She stopped trying to be felt and started being real. It was only when Mary stopped trying to provoke reactions and began to observe what truly creates bonds that she understood something that completely changes the way she views relationships. A man doesn't miss her absence. He misses the emotional experience he shares with her. And this experience doesn't stem from strategies or calculated silence, but from much deeper elements that, when present, ensure that absence is not ignored, but inevitably felt. The first of these elements is emotional peace, because when being with you isn't a space of tension, constant demands, or instability, but a place where he can breathe, let his guard down, and simply exist without feeling pressured, your presence becomes associated with something he will naturally want in return. This doesn't mean accepting everything or erasing yourself, but understanding that the way you communicate, react, and handle situations creates an emotional environment that can be light or draining. And when it's light, he not only enjoys being there, he misses it when you're not. The second element is genuine connection. That rare feeling of being seen in a genuine way, of not having to perform all the time, of knowing that there is someone who understands your nuances, your silences, and even that which you cannot explain clearly. When a man feels truly understood, he doesn't just associate you with moments, but with a deeper emotional experience, and that creates a bond that isn't easily replaced by distractions or new people. And the third element, which is often the most difficult to sustain, is the awareness of real loss, which doesn't come from threats, games, or forced separations, but from the way you position yourself within the relationship, when your presence is constant, but not guaranteed at any cost. When you don't beg for attention, don't force yourself to stay where you don't feel valued, and don't compromise your own worth to keep someone around. You create a kind of silent respect that makes them understand that they could lose you. And it is this combination that changes everything, because now it's no longer about trying to be missed, but about being someone whose absence naturally creates a void, not through effort, but through the impact they left behind. Mary realized that while trying to control his behavior, she was ignoring what truly builds desire and connection. And when she shifted her focus, she understood that what makes someone come back isn't emptiness, but what they can't find anywhere else. Because in the end, he doesn't miss the silence, he misses the experience. In the end, Mary realized that everything she had been trying to do from the beginning stemmed from a quiet place of insecurity because she believed she needed to evoke in him a feeling that, if it were real, would never need to be forced. She understood that it wasn't about disappearing to be noticed, nor about holding back to appear valuable, but about building such a genuine presence that absence would naturally be felt. And it is precisely here that there is a difference that changes everything. The woman who plays is always calculating her next move, measuring what she can or cannot show, trying to control how she is perceived, while the woman who scores doesn't need to diminish who she is to be valued, because her impact comes from how she exists, not how she hides. The woman who plays games lives according to the other person's reaction, waiting for signals, interpreting silences, and adjusting her own behavior to try to maintain interest, while the woman who makes a move observes, feels, perceives, and decides based on what she receives, without needing to distort herself to sustain something that cannot sustain itself. And this change isn't external. It's not about superficially doing something different, but about ceasing to act out of fear of loss and beginning to position oneself based on an awareness of one's own worth. Because when you understand this, you stop trying to be felt and start becoming someone who truly leaves a mark, not because you distanced yourself, but because you were present in a way that cannot be replaced. He doesn't miss you because you disappeared. He misses you because no one can replace you. If this video resonated with you, if at any point you recognized yourself in these situations or realized something you couldn't name before, please like and follow the channel, because that's what shows me that this type of content really helps you and also allows more women to have access to this clarity. And tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this, because sharing your experience might be exactly what another woman needs to read to finally understand what she's feeling.